Whitechapel, East London, home to one of England's most renowned, brutal and most evasive murderers of all time, Jack the Ripper. We explore these brutal murders from the gruesome beginnings to the mysterious end. This is Dark Histories, where the facts are worse than fiction. In 1888, England was ruled by Queen Victoria. The British Empire was in full swing and London was the largest capital city in the world. East London, however, did not reflect this period's supposed prosperity. It was a densely populated area where the residents lived in poverty, amongst the highest crime rates and with little future prospects. Whole families were often residing in just one room. Whitechapel, a district of East London, had the highest crime and death rates of the city. It was also home to much of the immigrant communities, leading to high racial tensions exacerbated by high unemployment and overcrowding. There were many law-abiding and hard-working citizens, however, there were also many slums and ghettos full of drunken violence and crime. For the poorest, housing came in the form of lodging or bunk houses. These were large buildings where people could rent a bed for a night, or if they couldn't afford that, could sleep standing up, propped up by a rope. The bunk houses were crumbling and upkeep was overlooked by the landlords. The roads and alleyways around the bunkhouses were often dark, winding and full of squalor. The East End could certainly be a pretty grim place, full of anxiety and fear, poverty and crime. Many women who had found themselves in hard times took to prostitution to fund their beds in the bunkhouses. These were women of an East End underclass who were poor, desperate and struggling. It was these working women that would become the focus of a murderer who arose in Whitechapel during 4 months in 1888. Causing fear amongst England's populace with a brutal series of murders, Jack the Ripper. Though there are 5 canonical or accepted victims of Jack the Ripper, there are theories that his murders may have escalated in brutality, and that some early attacks could also be attributed to him. These attacks have been debated for years, some debunked and others still open to interpretation. Considering the violence at the time, there are many possible victims of Jack's early attacks. We will focus on just 2 murders prior to the canonical 5, as whether or not they were Ripper killings, the first marks a landmark in the history of the Ripper case, and the second is classed by many to be the likeliest non-canon victim, and still holds the subject of many heated debates. Emma Smith suffered a brutal attack on the night of the 3rd of April 1888. She survived the initial attack and finally, through coercion from 2 women from her lodging house, made it to the London hospital on Whitechapel Road. She spoke to the doctors there and explained that she had been beaten and robbed by a gang of men. Emma Smith died later that morning on the 4th of April. Her story of being attacked by a gang of men is largely accepted and therefore her murderer was unlikely to be Jack the Ripper. However, her death marks a landmark in the history of the Ripper case, being that it saw the opening of the Whitechapel murders file by the police. This file would later encompass the Ripper killings. Martha Tabram was a prostitute in her late 30s. During the late hours of August the 6th, she was working with her friend Mary Ann Connolly. They had picked up 2 soldiers and had split off, presumably to get to business. Her body was later found in the early hours of the morning on August the 7th by John Saunders Reeves, who was on his way to work. She was found sprawled out on the landing of the George's Yard buildings, arms and hands by her side and legs open. She had been brutally stabbed 39 times. The soldier in this story would be the natural first suspect, however, despite a lineup, neither soldier was ever identified. 2 other witnesses had passed by the scene at earlier times of the night and had not seen Martha's body. Though this may be attributed to the darkness of the buildings themselves, being that there was no lighting, it could be argued that they simply could not see the body. This, however, leaves the debate open as to whether or not she was killed by the soldier, or perhaps by her client later on in the night. Further arguments state that her body was found close to the Ripper heartland, and her wounds were concentrated in much the same areas of the body of the Ripper victims, though her throat was never cut. Several of the detectives and important police figures who worked on the Ripper case themselves considered Martha Tabrams to be the first Ripper victim, leaving it open to many still today as the most likely non-canon attack to have been by the Ripper himself. The brutality of the murder shocked East London, though this was just the beginning of what was to be a bloody and gruesome 4 months for Whitechapel. Come back for the following episodes where we'll follow the story of Jack. Please like, subscribe, and sleep tight.